Is the Cove light method any good? And more importantly, can it work as a tool for a small-sized crew? If you shoot in tiny rooms with a small team, you need a setup that is fast to build and easy to replicate. So we put the Cove to the test, tried a bunch of variation on top of it, and compared it to the methods that most people reach by default. One of them surprised us. A little about me: I run a production company named CROMO. We do mostly advertising, but we are in the middle of 2 documentary productions. So we do many interviews, and we are always hunting for setups that are easy to replicate and fit in different spaces, even in tiny ones. Quick note before we start: I'm opening a Patreon with my longer tutorials, lessons and downloadable clips to practice with. More on that at the end. Now let's get to it. So where does this technique come from? The Cove light is a technique that comes from Roger Deakins. When in tight spots, he often bounces light off of a white or unbleached cloth, placed as walls on the side of the camera, creating a white cove that wraps around the actor and allows them to move freely without stepping outside of the light. The name Cove was apparently coined by others observing his work, rather than by Deakins himself. Anyway, the idea here is to create this white wall, then place multiple lights that shoot from the floor upwards toward the cloth, which then bounces the light back, coming slightly from below. The lights are stronger on the side, then become dimmer and dimmer as you move across the length, in a way that creates some form of shadow on the subject, although very subtle. Alright, so how do you actually build one on set? So we started by exposing for the background light. We combined it with a classic lighting trick: soft on face, hard on body. We placed a first Fresnel light hitting the subject body, hard on body. Then a second Fresnel with half the power hitting the background through the window to recreate some sunlight. Then we turned on the first light hitting the code, the second, and the third. To give you an idea of the proportions, if the first light is at 100%, the second is at about 30%, and the third at about 5%. This creates a soft fall-off across the body. The side closest to the cove is the brightest, and the light gradually dims as it wraps around, giving the subject a subtle three-dimensionality without a hard shadow line. Lighting like this is a very smart choice. The whole cove was made with 2 stands, a pole, a few clamps, so it was very quick to set up. Contrary to normal setups, the light comes from below, so it hits the chin before the rest of the face. But the effect does not look weird at all, it is actually quite natural. The cove looks great, but what happens if you flip it? Instead of coming at the subject from a 45-degree angle, we pushed it more to the side, close to 90 degrees. So now the stronger Fresnel light is pushed to the background. The second Fresnel, with half the power, is moved instead to the body. Then we switched off the last light on the cove and replaced the white cloth with a black one for negative fill. It is a more natural looking setup than the normal cove, but also feels a bit less intentional, so less effective overall. The Cove works on its own, but can we push it further with extra diffusion and filters? The first experiment is with a simple black Promise filter. The Promise takes out some of the contrast and softens the image. Not a bad look, but not a definitive improvement. Here you can see the normal Cove on the left and the Promised version on the right, with a little exposure correction to bring back some contrast. The next experiment is with haze. We filled the room with a lot of ultra-thin haze and waited for it to settle. The raw look is a bit grey, but it improves a lot when graded. Here's a comparison between the normal Cove and the one with haze. We also tried the reverse Cove with haze, and the look improved a lot. Here is a comparison between the Cove and the reverse Cove with haze. So here's the real test. Can this simple setup beat the gear everybody usually goes for? The first we tried is a softbox. I'm usually not a fan of softboxes because I find them harsh and generally too small to work well. The one we used is Aperture's biggest one, the dome. The lighting is very similar to the reverse Cove, with the main difference being that the light comes from the top instead of the bottom. I personally prefer the light coming from the bottom, so I prefer the Cove. The softbox also looks very different from the normal Cove, which is still the best looking setup so far. But everything changes when you put the honeycomb on the softbox. The honeycomb is the directional black grid that is strapped on the top, and it helps control the spread of the light. The difference here is very drastic, and although the image looks more lit and less natural, the light falls in a much more interesting way and the subject pops out a lot more. This is probably my second favorite look. Here is a comparison between the softbox without and with the honeycomb. Lastly, I always wanted to try a photographic umbrella. I bought a cheap one that is huge and tried it to see how it compares to the lights I usually use. And it looks kind of bad, even with its diffusion on. It's very harsh and makes the skin very shiny. It creates a lot of spill and a lot of shadows. So after all of this, which setup actually wins? Here's the short version. The Cove is the best all-rounder. The softbox with the honeycomb is the surprise runner-up. And the reverse Cove is the one to keep for documentary work. Here's why. The Cove is my top pick. It's soft, flattering on faces, and it holds up when subjects move. So it's the one I reach for on commercials and ads, and where people need to look their best. The softbox with the honeycomb caught me off guard. I don't usually care for softboxes, but the grid makes the light expressive and draws faces really well. It doesn't feel natural, but it carries a punch. Perfect for internet ads, podcasts, anything that has a longer run. The reverse Cove is the documentary choice. Paired with negative fill, a half Cove with a bit of haze, it looks realistic but still dramatic, when the light needs to feel natural, but you still want some expression. And for the add-ons, the haze is worth it for a soft, warm, artsy feel on short or indie film. But it's too much hassle for interviews. The Promised, honestly, I'd skip. Thank you for making it this far. So let me talk about my Patreon account. As a professor, I accumulated many lessons on interesting topics that are sometimes too in-depth for YouTube, and I have to say, are mostly well-kept secrets among professionals. This is why I decided to create a database of in-depth interesting content on Patreon, containing tutorials, but also university lessons, texts, and more importantly, presets and example material. Many of you ask me if I can upload footage you can practice with, so I figured Patreon is the best place to keep this material and share it with you. So thank you for checking it out and for supporting my channel.